now give you the time to lead the next session. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Elia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is privilege to moderate this second session. I'm grateful that you are committed to following. My pleasure to introduce you our speaker, Dr. Jenry E. Mandey. Please admit, share screen the CV. Okay, thank you. Dr. Jenry, born and raised in Minahasa, North Sulawesi. Next. Okay, he completed his bachelor's degree at Staken Manado, Indonesia, master's degree at Cipanas Theological College, West Java, Indonesia, and doctoral study at Heidelberg University, Germany. Dr. Jenry has several language proficiencies. He masters various regional languages. Next. Okay. He masters various regional languages, primarily those of the Minahasa region. He is also fluent in several foreign languages, including English, German, Dutch, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and Arabic. Next. Currently, he works in multiple institutions as a lecturer in Koine Greek, Aramaic, Ancient Biblical Hebrew language, and Tanakh Hebrew Bible studies at Moriah Theological College. He is also a vice president for academic affairs at Moriah Theological College, president and philologist for biblical studies at Scriptura Indonesia. And he is also supervisor for Handiman Library in Tangerang, Indonesia. Next. He has produced numerous writings and publications, including books, you can see. And next. He also produced research journals and next. He is set to publish several other scholarly works. Okay, in this session, we will listen to his presentation, the relationship between Kohelet, Sadduceism, and Pharisaism. You can hardly wait any longer. Okay, hello, Dr. Jenry. We are
Hello,
glad
everyone.
having you here and can wait listening from you. You have 35 minutes to listen, and please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I would like to directly continue to my presentation, and I'll also share my screen. There you go. All right. So my presentation today is titled "Relationship between Kohelet, Sadduceism, and Pharisaism." Okay. Well, what is actually the Sadduceism or the Sadducees, which is called as the movement of the Sadducees and the movement of the Pharisees? The origins of these movements are actually unknown, but the information available indicates that they were the two largest Jewish movements from the 1st century BC to the 1st century CE. Actually, there are not many studies that undergo into expensive depth about their beginnings. And about the Kohelet and its movement, the Kohelet is actually the book of Kohelet. And in my research that was published last year in German, you can see it here, with the title Die Koheletische Denkbewegung, or the Koheletic Thought Movement. This movement produced the book of Kohelet, and there I gave brief comparison, especially the similarities and connection between the ideas of Kohelet as a thought movement and Sadduceism. And the Sadducees and the Pharisees, regarding their roots, despite the challenges, the material on the roots of Sadduceism is limited when compared to the Pharisaism as the progenitor of Rabbinic Judaism, which has richer textual sources. On this matter, for example, Saldarini writes, data on the Pharisees is so sparse and difficult to evaluate that any historical reconstruction must remain incomplete and uncomfortably hypothetical. So the Pharisees, in the beginning of the century, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are, known for us only from the names, but the origins, the story, the history behind it are actually quite hard to decipher, to explain to the readers, even though we only have small amount of information from small amount of sources as well. The term Sadducees and Pharisees should refer to the followers, in this case, the people of the movement. So the Sadducees and Pharisees. But the terms Sadduceism and Pharisaism are the reference to the ideas, theology, and their thought movement. First, I would like to explain about Kohelet as a thought movement, not only just as a book, part of the book of the Hebrew Bible. So the background is that the book of Kohelet is part of the Ketuvim, or the writings in Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, or in the Christian traditions, it would be also known as the Old Testament. And the name of the book, the name of the book in English is actually Ecclesiastes, but the real name in Hebrew is Kohelet. It's derived from the word kahal in Hebrew, which means gatherer or the one who gathers. While it is also read usually as part of the 5 Megillot in the Moadim, or the Jewish festivals, especially by the Ashkenazim. They would read the book of Kohelet on Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and therefore, as part of the Megillot, it is read in the context of the festivals. And the book of Kohelet is also part of the wisdom literature in the Israelite literature of the Bible. So this is the appearance of part of the book of Kohelet, the beginning part of the book of Kohelet in Leningrad Codex. And as we know that the book is also read on the festivals, it means that it has its cantillation. So the book is usually read with cantillation, as not only just the book of Kohelet, which is read with cantillations, but the whole Tanakh is actually read with cantillations, even though there are different types of cantillations with different type of literatures in the book of, or in the whole Tanakh, or in the whole Hebrew Bible. But especially in the part of Kohelet, there is a unique sound or unique cantillation that I would like to present to you shortly, because the whole book I can't, of course, read one by one. So the beginning part should be read like this. דברי קהלת בן דוד מלך בירושלים, הבל הבלים, אמר קהלת, הבל הבלים, הכל הבל, מה יתרון לאדם, וכל עמלו שיעמול תחת השמש, דור הולך ודור בא, והארץ לעולם עומדת, והריח השמש ובא השמש, ואל מקומו שואף, זורח הוא שם. And we can continue it in another time, but that's the beginning of the book of Kohelet, especially if you see the appearance in the Leningrad Codex. The brief history about the emergence of the book of Kohelet was actually The emergence is in the era of the Greek people that invaded the Eretz Israel, or the land of Israel in that time. So the Hellenistic era in the land of Israel is from the year 333 BC to 167 BC. And the Ptolemaic era in the land of Israel from 283 to 238 BCE is the era in which Kohelet and the apocalyptic movement or literature emerged. So especially in this reigns of three different leaders or different governors of the area, the Ptolemy the Fourth Philopator, 221 BCE, and the Fourth Syrian War happened. Sorry, so the second era was the war, and then the third era in the Ptolemaic era was the Ptolemy the Fifth Epiphanes, 204 to 180 BC. The Seleucid era in the land of Israel was then the continuation of the Ptolemaic era that also became the historical background of the emergence of the Book of Kohelet. Therefore, the time of emergence of the Book of Kohelet could be put in the 3rd century BC. Although the latest era could even be considered until around the 2nd century BC, still in the Ptolemaic era. We can see the reference from Lawrence and Schellenberg and Schönberger. And during this time, Israel was no longer a part of Ptolemaic kingdom during the time of Ptolemy the Fifth Epiphanes and Ptolemy the Sixth Philometor, since the Seleucids had captured it during the Fifth Syrian War. One of the researchers about Kohelet, Loffing, for example, contends that Kohelet is from a family of priests who were involved in the temple school, and it was evident from the analysis of Kohelet 5, for example, because there are many analyses of the Book of Kohelet, that the temple theology became the main focus, particularly in the light of Kohelet's connections to apocalyptic themes. Because in my theory, in my thesis, in my dissertation, in my research last year, 2023, I proposed the idea that there is the connection between Kohelet and the apocalyptic movement. And the Koheletic movement that produced the Book of Kohelet was an anti-apocalyptic movement. It was not supporting the apocalyptic movement, but it was as a counter movement of the apocalyptic movement. It is significant to note that the temple is directly related to the function of priests in Jerusalem because it served as a location for worship and as a physical location of God. Kohelet has a connection to the priesthood in Jerusalem. The role of the priest is portrayed as that of wise men in the Book of Kohelet as wisdom literature. What is the characteristics of the Koheletic thought movement? One example of the Kohelet relation with the apocalyptic or the ancient Jewish apocalyptic ideas is that Kohelet 5 has a connection with the apocalyptic temple theology. But Kohelet 5 is once again a counter idea of the apocalyptic theology, especially the apocalyptic temple theology. The idea of the relationship between temple theology and the origin of the apocalypticism temple theology is also one of the apocalyptic motives. Therefore, this motive is against the idea of Kohelet 5, or on the contrary, we could say that Kohelet 5 is against this idea. It was proposed first by Hamilton Kelly in his writing, actually from quite very long time ago, a few decades ago, 1970, but it was not really read. It was not really read by the publics and quite hidden in the studies of the anti-apocalyptic movement. And another thesis was proposed by Alexander Roffey in his two writings in Hebrew and in English. Should be in Hebrew, but this one is translated into German as well. But this idea that in Kohelet 5, for example, it is the anti-idea of the apocalyptic temple theology. He translates, for example, this sentence in Kohelet 5, the usual translation is translated like this: you shall not say before the messenger, lifne hamalach, that it is a mistake. It is just trying to say that you can't say in front of the messenger, in front of the priest. There is another interpretation of this text, that it is a mistake. You can't make a mistake in the temple. But according to Roffey, a Italian Jewish Israeli Italian Jew, translated this phrase not as a lifnei hamalach, but lefanai hamalach, because the original text was not with the vocalization, but with only with the consonants. So these two phrases, these two words, lifnei hamalach, should not be read as lifnei hamalach. Instead, lefanai hamalach. So this text should be read like this: and the translation should be different as well. And it is anti-apocalyptic. The translation should be, you shall not say that before me is the angel. Before me there is an angel. There is the angel, or it is a mistake, because before me there is not any angel. And it is a mistake to say that there is angel in the sense of the apocalyptic ideas. So one of the apocalyptic motives is temple theology, according to Hamilton Kelly in 1970. The apocalyptic influence in Kohelet 5 is clear, with the motives of temple theology, the dream, angels, and even arguably dualism. It is trying to, the text is trying to use the apocalyptic language, but it is actually not apocalyptic. Just the language is similar to apocalyptic, but the idea is anti-apocalyptic. And this is very unique in my research that was published last year, that Kohelet is a counter movement of the Jewish apocalyptic movement or thought movement that emerged in the 3rd to the 2nd century BC. And the motive of Kohelet 5 is clear. It is anti-apocalyptic. So there is anti-apocalyptic or apocalyptic elements in Kohelet as a book of wisdom. And what is it as a conclusion of this relation between apocalyptic and the book of Kohelet? And it is shown that historical connection between Kohelet and apocalypticism, that it was written in the Ptolemaic times. So both emerged in approximately in the same time. And Kohelet uses apocalyptic motives and features for his goal, which is anti-apocalyptic, with joy in life, nothing in life but joy in God. So it is opposing the ideas of apocalyptic. Kohelet uses apocalyptic language to explain his own goal, to proclaim his message. And in other places, the texts are quite explicitly anti-apocalyptic without apocalyptic language. There is no, for example, there's no, the idea of resurrection is questioned by Kohelet. For example, in Kohelet 9, the main source of apocalyptic literature is the book of Enoch, or Henoch. Other apocalyptic sources are also possible, but I suggest that Kohelet read the work of the book of Enoch, and he was trying to oppose it. The whole message of Kohelet is anti-apocalyptic. joy of life or enjoyment of life, and nothing in life but in God. And after death, there is nothing, no life, but back to God, unity with God. It's an alternative hope um, from the ideas of the apocalyptic. Kohelet represents the orthodoxy of the ancient Israelite idea of hope after death against the new idea or solution. The apocalyptic Ecclesiastes or Kohelet has this new modified idea of Sheol. So Sheol and unity of the soul or life with God, and there's no this type of idea such as resurrection, resurrection of the body. The framework of Kohelet's anti-apocalyptic literature is wisdom, or the wisdom as the root of apocalypticism, for example, proposed by von Rad. And Kohelet's focus is hope on present life, not death. So the focus of Kohelet is this life. That's why it is trying to oppose the ideas that is praising the life after death. The praise should be referred to the life in this time. Kohelet rejects the idea of life after death as the central theology of apocalypticism. So from Kohelet's language, what is the Koheletic thought movement that produced the Book of Kohelet? It is a small, unique movement in Ptolemaic period, not a traditional movement, wisdom or particular wisdom movement, an anti-apocalyptic movement of priests as sages, an important influence on Sadduceism, independent movement with the Book of Kohelet. This literature, use of a particular style of language in a piece of literature, the anti-apocalyptic language in the Book of Kohelet, and it is also, of course, the counter movement as a movement of thought to apocalypticism. Now, after we understand the idea of what Kohelet's movement is, or what the Koheletic thought movement is, we continue to the next session about the Kohelet's relationship with Sadduceism. So, as previously mentioned, the Sadducees are not extensively covered in literature, in ancient literature. The New Testament, the rabbinic scriptures, and Josephus' writings account for the majority. The Sadducees are merely mentioned in number of sources without any more description of their actions, history, origins, or teachings. The main historical sources of both Sadducees and Pharisees are the New Testament, Josephus' writings, and rabbinic writings. And the New Testament gives details concerning the Sadducees' doctrine, not the details about their historical background, but only the doctrine. Once again, only the doctrine, specifically their statement that there is no resurrection of the dead, according to their doctrine, and the origin of it in the New Testament, the origin of the Sadducees is also unclear. The Pharisees hold the same apocalyptic belief with the New Testament regarding the resurrection of the dead, and it is important to keep in mind that the Pharisees must be viewed as belonging to apocalyptic traditions in some ways. But both of these movements are unknown from the origin. We only know it's their appearance in the ancient world without knowing any origin of both of them. And the second source is from Josephus, Bellum Judaicum, Jewish War, chapter 2, verse 119, and Antiquitates Judaicae, Antiquity of the Jews. These sources only list the Sadducees with the three Jewish factions or schools of thought that existed in Josephus' time, which are the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Essenes. The other Jewish schools or factions are not mentioned. According to the rabbinic writings as the youngest sources of these two movements, the first passage of Mishnah Yadayim, chapter 4, verses 6 to 8, briefly references the Pharisees and Sadducees without going into any further depth. The second passage, Midrash Tanhuma, Brashith 5, verses 2 to 3, citing Job 7:9, provides some insight into the group's primary tenet. They rejected both the afterlife and the resurrection. The final paragraph is found in Moriah 4a12, and it provides some insight into their religious practices by stating that they only accepted the written Torah, which they took it literally, and rejected the oral Torah, or the Torah Shebalpeh, or the Talmud, which is codified later in the 2nd century. The etymology of the word Sadducee. According to Manson, the name's derivation is from Zadok. It's actually incorrect to the letter because of the letter Dalet with a double consonant in there, because the name Sadduki should contain double letter in the letter of Dalet. He prefers the Aramaic root Sidqa instead, and in his opinion, Tzedek or righteous, or Sadiq, righteous one for person, is viewed as a self-designation of the Sadducee. But the etymology is not from the from Tzedek or Sadiq, instead from the Aramaic word Sidqa. The narrative of Zadok, Zadok, the high priest, is more likely where the word's origin Zadok comes from. This Zadokite tradition is probably where the Sadducean tradition originates. What are the characteristics of the Sadducees? The first is the anti-apocalyptic theory, just like Kohelet, which denies angels' existence, the afterlife, and the possibility of a resurrection or other form of life after death. Also could be compared by with these other sources as well. In terms of religious practice, the Sadducees, as already indicated, rejected the oral Torah and applied a literal interpretation to just the scriptures, which is just the Torah. They do not accept the Nevi'im and Ketuvim writings. The rejection of the apocalyptic ideas was shared by the Sadducees, but this did not necessarily imply that the Koheletic thinking movement or the Koheletic thought movement was already a component of Sadduceism. The first glance of the Sadducees' relationship with Kohelet could be described as follows. Kohelet's authority was never attributed to the Sadducees or the higher priest Zadok. Rather, it was always attributed to Solomon. Additionally, Sadduceism has never been associated with the name Kohelet. Its origins, or Kohelet's role as a wise man and teacher, at least not in the ancient scriptures. And in comparison to the period of origin of the Koheletic thought movement, the formation of Sadduceism is likewise seen as occurring later. According to Kekler, the development of Sadduceism only occurred in the latter half of the 2nd century BCE, which may have coincided with the Maccabean uprising. So, what is then the relationship between Kohelet and Pharisaism, or the Pharisees, after we discussed about the Kohelet's relationship with Sadduceism? Well, similar to the main sources of the information regarding the Sadducees, the primary historical sources on the Pharisees are also the New Testament, Josephus' writings, and the earlier rabbinical writings. They are the same. So these three ancient writings are the main sources of the information, without expressing any ideas about the origin of these two movements. It's possible that the Pharisees first appeared during the Hasmonean era and developed into a distinct sect of lay people and its scribes in opposition to the Sadducees. So they are from the lower classes, while the Sadducees are from the higher classes. The name Pharisee could be derived from the word parash in Hebrew, meaning separate, and meant that those who bore it were separated from all that is abominable in God's sight. And the Pharisees as a sect developed not only as a single faction, rather with two houses, or pairs, zugoth in Hebrew, during the 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE. The houses of Hillel and Shammai were the most prominent in the development of Jewish law and life, especially after the destruction of the Second Jewish Temple in 70 CE. And what are the characteristics of the Pharisees? The Pharisees tend to be more eschatological and apocalyptic in terms of how they perceive life and death, in contrast to the Sadducees. In this life and the next, the Sadducees saw humans as independent and cut off from God. In contrast, the Pharisees saw God and humanity as having a close relationship in both. They did not remove their social life from Jerusalem society, as the Essenes did. Despite the meaning of the word Pharisee from the word parash, which means to be separated or to separate. In keeping with this notion, Hillel is credited with the Pharisee slogan, Al tiprosh min hasibur, do not separate yourself from the community. And the relationship between Pharisees with Kohelet could be seen as not directly. So there's no direct relationship. Kohelet did not produce Pharisaism, and Pharisaism also did not associate themselves with the Kohelet. And the ideas are not also similar between Kohelet and Pharisaism. The contribution is through Sadduceism that also played an important role in building a relation and contact with Pharisees. Some of the similar theological positions and ideological characteristics of Kohelet could also be found in Sadduceism, which are on the contrary to Pharisaism. Then Kohelet's position in this regard is a counter position towards Pharisaism. Unique ideas are provided by some scholars, for example, Michel, Levy, and also Hölscher, on the relationship between Kohelet and the Pharisees through Sadduceism. The conclusion for the relationship between Kohelet, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees, Kohelet, Sadduceim, and Perushim. Well, my arguments would like to present the idea that the Koheletic thought movement through its literature, the Book of Kohelet, has an impact on Sadduceism. This is through the similarities between the anti-apocalyptic notions of Kohelet and the belief of Sadducees. However, one could not deny the Koheletic thought movement started earlier than Sadduceism. Both should then be considered two separate movements in the ideas in two different periods, despite the fact that the Koheletic thought movement cannot be instantly and directly understood as a component of Sadduceism. It ultimately leads to this school of thinking. However, Kohelet has had certainly some impact on Sadducees theology, even though it can be challenging to pinpoint the origins of this Sadducee tradition. I believe that Koheletic philosophy is one of the many prior traditions that contributed to the development of Sadduceism. The ideology of Sadduceism was inspired by the anti-apocalyptic theology that came from the Koheletic thought movement. Early in the 1st century, these became the earliest branch of Judaism. One certainly cannot deny that the years gap between the emergence of the Koheletic thought movement and the historical accounts of the Sadducees and Pharisees lies around 1 to 2 centuries. Kohelet appeared during the late Ptolemaic period, and the two sects emerged around the early time of the Hasmonean period, possibly after the Maccabean revolt. This time different gave us a mystery in terms of the development between Koheletic era and the Pharisaic and Sadducee era, due to the lack of historical information. As mentioned above, the main historical resources on the Sadducees and Pharisees are the New Testament, Josephus, and earlier rabbinic writings. While for Kohelet, it is only the Book of Kohelet Kohelet, the Kohelet thought movement only produces the book of Kohelet, and that was the main source of this thought movement. The line that could be traced is through its similar and contradictory ideas. Hellenistic era is still the similar historical context in which these groups emerged. As the conclusion, given the contrast between the two groups in two separate times, it is clear that the Kohelet thought movement was not merely an extension of Sadduceism. However, these discrepancies are actually more pronounced than the more obvious similarities between Kohelet and Sadducees' teachings. As a result, Sadduceism and Koheletic thought movement should be distinguished from another. The influence to Pharisaism. It is still difficult to draw a direct connection between Kohelet and Pharisees. However, the indirect influence is evident in the relationship between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. My argument illustrate the impact of Kohelet and Sadduceism. It is plausible that the opposing ideas of Sadduceism, with its pragmatic and worldly beliefs, and Pharisaism would also reflect the contradictory thoughts of Kohelet and Pharisees. Nevertheless, the influence of the Koheletic thought movement and anti-apocalyptic ideas that go along with it could also be stretched further in on the canonization. The choice to canonize the Hebrew Bible could be considered as the impact of the anti-apocalyptic point of view on the canonization. As an example, the book of Daniel is a book in the Hebrew canon with a full stage of apocalyptic views, as the selection of writings to be included in the canon was also somewhat anti-apocalyptic. It could also be hypothesized that the Pharisees are likely responsible for the canonization. We can compare it with the research of Heidelberg in 1905. This could be considered as the response to the Hellenistic influence on Jewish culture, and this may possibly have played a significant role in the canonization of the Hebrew Bible. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope we can discuss some things regarding this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jenry. I'm going to allocate time for discussion and Q&A for the next 20 minutes. If anyone wants to ask questions,
please write it down
in the chat box
or raise your hand using the picture.
Okay, I'm going to read the first question from chat box. Maybe Dr. Harold, please wait up. Okay, Dr. Jenny, I'm going to read the first question from Junita. Kohelet provides a very profound understanding of how short human life is, full of conflict, injustice, and things that are difficult to understand. What do you think?
Saying that it is difficult to understand is not 100% true, because if you understand that Koheletic stance is actually against the idea of apocalyptic, then you could see the puzzles are being put together, even though you should also convince people that it is anti-apocalyptic. So why is it like focusing on the life? Because it is anti-apocalyptic. Jewish apocalyptic view, which also influenced the ideas of the apocalyptic ideas in the New Testament or in Christianity, is focusing the theology in the life after death, or the resurrection of the dead, and any form of the ideas that there is life after death. But Kohelet is not against that there is life after death, but it is quite skeptical because the focus is not that. The focus is this life. So it is not saying that there is no life after death. Or maybe it is also saying like that. But for me, the main focus of Kohelet is actually life in this life, not the life after death. Don't focus on the life after death. Just focus on this life. Focus that you are still living and you will die one day. Therefore, use your time. So use your time, and because there is also, according to Kohelet 3, for example, kol zaman, la kol zaman. Everything has its time, and including you, for the apocalyptic, that the end of time is the end of time for everyone, for the universe. But the end of time that we should be aware of is the end of time of our own life. That our own life is the real end of time. Because if you die, what would you do? Your focus should be in this life. That's the focus of Kohelet. So saying that it is difficult to understand, you need to put the puzzles together.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jenry. I think it's clear, Junita. And I'm going to read the second question from Juliana. The book of the Ecclesiastes is influenced by the Hellenistic school of thought. In a Hellenistic perspective, the book of Ecclesiastes presents the antithesis of thought between a pessimistic and optimistic spirit. In general, there are two streams of philosophy that have an impact of the book of the Kohelet, namely Epicureanism philosophy and determinism philosophy. What do you think about the core theology that everything is vanity, Hebel? Thank you.
So I would oppose the idea that Ecclesiastes, or the book of Kohelet, is influenced by Hellenistic school of thought. That's totally wrong, according to me. Because what? Because I have the data that there are also influences from other languages, and the data is according to the language of the book. So you need to read it in Hebrew. Don't read it in the translations, and that would be wrong. Because you can't understand the core theology, and you can't see the influences from other languages. For example, in my book, but it's still in German. In my book, I wrote that these influences are seen in the language, and there is Aramaism. There are so many Aramaic words that are used in the book of Kohelet, and there are also some words from Persian words, which are also used. The Persian idea is also used in the apocalyptic thought. But Greekism, the influence of the Greek language into the book, I could find nothing. So if you say that there is similarities, probably Kohelet heard about that, but he was not influenced by them. Kohelet is a philosopher, quote unquote, because he's not philosopher. He's not philosopher according to the philosophy of the Greeks, but he's a philosopher according to the wisdom of the Jewish people in the ancient era. And there are no you can't really prove that there is this connection between Kohelet and Epicureanism philosophy and determinism philosophy. What's the proof? You prove it from the idea. How do you prove the idea? You prove the idea from the language. You need to read it from its original language. And the core theology is not about Hevel. Hevel is, or Hevel in modern Hebrew. Hevel is actually not the core idea of Kohelet. The core idea is enjoy your life and serve God. That's the main idea of Kohelet. It's not about vanity. It's not about Hevel. Hevel is a mockery to the people who are trying to say that your main focus is life after death. So Kohelet is like trying to mock them with actually the sense of humor. And you could also find that in my book, that Kohelet is trying to give humor to the people who reads it, and especially trying to mock the people who are trying to say, oh, there is life after death, and we are focusing on the life after death. According to Kohelet, focus on this life, because everything is nonsense. Everything everything makes sense because you use this life well, and you use it for God. That's the enjoyment. So, like you're saying, Hevel Havalim, Amar Kohelet Hevel Havalim, he's saying like that in a like mocking sense of humor and trying to laugh a little bit.
Okay,
Thank you, Dr.
Jenry.
Okay, the next question I will give chance to Dr. Harold. Please.
Okay, thank you for the marvelous presentation, Dr. Jenry. First thing, I just want to make sure from the anti-apocalyptic background of the book of Kohelet, then can we say that the language of vanity or futility that appears a lot in the book of Kohelet, because they do not believe there is life after death?
Okay. So I'm not trying to say that he doesn't believe it, but he's trying to oppose this exaggerating idea that your focus is not this life, but the life after death. So he's not trying to reject it, actually, for me, but probably he is also trying to reject it. But for me, I would like to see that he's not rejecting it, but he's like, quite skeptic about it. He's not skeptic, but he's trying to be agnostic about it. He doesn't want to care. He doesn't want to care about life after death. His main focus, his main care is this life. So it's not trying to disprove that there is no life after death, because Kohelet 3:21 and Kohelet 12 is saying that if you die, your soul or your nefesh goes back to God. So it's not rejecting it.
So can we say that according to Christian eschatology or the New Testament perspective, the book of Kohelet is unfinished book?
It's not unfinished, but for example, like in Mark 13, it is also anti-apocalyptic. So it's not unfinished, but it has different style. So it's not like the New Testament, which is full of apocalyptic ideas, but it has its different style. Just you can't put together that the whole Bible is the same style. It has different styles, different literatures, different times of emergence, and different authors, different languages. So Kohelet is just different. But this, the similarity with the whole Hebrew Bible, and also the similarity with the New Testament, that it believes in Kohelet believes in God, and there is God, a God that provides. That's the main idea.
Okay. Any response or comment, Dr. Harold? Okay, I think it's enough. Thank you for discussion. We still have time for discussion or Q&A. I'm gonna read from chat room from Yusak Susilo. Could it be said that Jesus was Pharisees or a faction of that regarding to his eschatological view?
This is a good statement, actually. I agree with that, because many people would make an opposition between or contradiction between Jesus and the Pharisees. But it's actually not like that, because Jesus's main theology is actually really similar to the Pharisees' main theology, especially regarding the life after death. And I would say that the idea of the theology, Jesus' theology in the New Testament, which is provided in the New Testament, is actually a Pharisaic idea, and it's Hillel. As I mentioned before, that there are two pairs, usually one pair, or two. Okay, sorry, I've been talking along, but it was unmuted, so I need to repeat it again. So this idea that there is this connection between Jesus and the Pharisees is actually an interesting statement, and I agree with that, because the especially with the idea that there is life after death, and these two this movement, the Pharisaic movement, is also providing this idea like that. And if you say that there's contradiction between Jesus and the Pharisees, you should read it again according to the real text, according to the original text in Greek. And if you read it in Matthew 23, if I'm not mistaken, there is this opposition between Jesus and the Pharisees, but you can't say that, or you can't read that it is the whole Pharisees, because in the Pharisaic movement, there are also, in the early Pharisaic movement, there is this period of the Zugoth. Zugoth means pairs. So the pairs in that time, in Jesus' time, was between Hillel and Shammai. So the school of Hillel is more moderate, while the school of Shammai was quite conservative, quite strict, and very strict, I would say. And there are also some fake Pharisees, and Jesus was trying to oppose the fake Pharisees. According to the Sota, according to the Talmud Bavli, Sota, to be, if I'm not mistaken, there's also mentioned that there are also typical or the characteristics of the fake Pharisees. And it was also really similar with the ideas in Matthew 23 that Jesus was opposing the Pharisees, but we should read it that Jesus was opposing the fake Pharisees, because I would say that the main or the core theology of Jesus was also the Pharisaic movement. And Pharisaic, I also explained it in my presentation today, that the Pharisaic movement was very rooted in the people, in the lower classes. So just like the Jesus movement in the early period, and it was really similar, I would say. So trying to say that Jesus was opposing the Pharisees, the whole Pharisees, actually wrong.
Okay. Interesting discussing this topic, and so many questions in the chat room. I'm going to read the next question from Tanya. Kohelet provides a very profound understanding of how short human life is. I think this question is same as Junita, right? So I will next read the next question from Helmut, and I think Helmut raised hand. Okay, you have 2 questions in the chat room, Helmut.
Yeah, actually it's the same, but I want to.
Do you want to
read
open
it.
mic?
Yeah. So I have 2 questions. Number 1, so from the conclusion, could we say that the Sadducees is a Jewish school wrote from Kohelet movement, and the Pharisaism is from apocalyptic movement? And the second question is, according to the first question, is Kohelet movement make a wrong state because it's produce Sadducees, which Jesus answered the question about resurrection, that Adonai, our God, is a living God? What do you think about it?
Well, with the first question, yeah, I totally agree with that. The Sadducees is rooted from, or has one of the roots, not really rooted only one root, but the Sadducees, the Sadduceism or the Sadducaic movement was actually rooted, or one of the roots of the Sadducees, of the Sadducaic movement, is Koheletic thought movement. It's the Kohelet idea, and one of the roots of the Pharisees, or the Pharisaism, is apocalyptic, and the main root, I would say, of the movement of the Pharisees is the Jewish apocalyptic ideas. So I agree with that. And the second question is, no, I wouldn't say that Kohelet makes a wrong state, because it is part of the Bible. So would you take out the book of Kohelet from the Bible? Every Abrahamic tradition would agree that the book of Kohelet is part of the Tanakh. So you can't say that it is a wrong movement, because it is part of the Bible. And if you say that it produced the Sadducees or the Sadduceism, and they became opposed, they became one of the parties that opposed by Jesus in the New Testament, I wouldn't say that it is, wrong impact. That's just the history. You could get your ideas from many movements in the past. You could get your theology from many different traditions in the past, and you could be wrong, even though the past movements were actually really inspiring movements, and then you became misleading because you took it differently. So every movement could develop into different directions, but you can't say that this movement is wrong, this movement is right. What is your stance? What is your background? What is your yeah? What is your proof that these movements are wrong? Just, I mean, it is not academic. This is not scientific. Scientific facts wouldn't say that this movement is wrong, this movement is right. No, you can't make distinguish like that just because of your personal ideas, because it is biased. So I'm trying to give scientific proofs here, historical scientific proof, and it is not biased with any of the background. It's just historical.
Okay, about the Sadducees itself, you mentioned earlier that they don't. Some of the book of the Tanakh, they don't use it, and why the Sadducees still agreed. I mean, the Israelites agreed that the Sadducees is one of the Jewish schools.
Because they were born Jews. And if you say that you are Indonesian, and for example, if you say that you are Indonesian citizen, but you are a terrorist, and you say not that you are still Indonesian, you are still Indonesian, and you're a terrorist. So I'm not comparing that the Sadducees are terrorists, but I'm trying to say that even though this movement is seen by the others as a different and wrong movement, it just doesn't make doesn't make the fact wrong, or doesn't disapprove that they are Jewish. They're all Jewish, and why didn't they believe in the resurrection? Because they are from the high social status people, and the high social status people, they usually do not need to believe in those things, and because in the Torah itself doesn't mention any of the resurrection. So the ideas of the resurrection and life after death are really booming. Were really booming actually since the emergence of the apocalyptic. So before that, it was not really the main idea. Main idea is about praising God. So it's not about life after death and so on.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks for discussion, Helmut. I'm gonna read the last question from Samuel. The narcissism of the Pharisees led them to total failure, namely not recognizing God in the flesh through his teaching. The Pharisees actively attacked God and manipulated political and religious pressures to the point where they, with the help of the Romans and Sadducees, killed him. Can we equate the Pharisees with Satan?
Well, I think that's a very judgmental statement, and I'm not saying like that. I'm saying that it's totally wrong. If you judge that the Pharisees are Satan, because the roots of Jesus' movement is also Pharisaism, is also apocalyptic, and that's why I'm trying to give you different type of history, different alternative explanation of the history. And the Pharisees are not just one movement. There are also different types of the Pharisees. Pharisees is just general term of the people, but there are different types. There are Zugoth, which is the between between the pairs, between two factions. In the New Testament time, it was between the Hillel and Shammai, the more moderate, quite modern in that time, movement, which is the Hillel movement, and the more conservative and more strict movement of the Pharisees, which is the Shammai followers. So trying to say that the Pharisees actively attacked God, what? No, of course not. They were the most active people, and they are the last movement in the ancient Jewish movement that's still preserved until today, which is the rabbinic Judaism. And without the Pharisees that also gathered together in Yamnia, there is no canonization of the Tanakh. So the canonization of the Tanakh are produced by the Pharisees in Yamnia after the destruction of the Second Temple. And without the Pharisees, there is no preservation of the Jewish traditions, and there is no preservations of, having a personal, national relation between the remnants of the Jews after the destruction of the temple in the 70 CE and God as the creator. So I wouldn't say like that the Pharisees actively attacked and manipulated political and religious pressures. It was actually the Sadducees who were collaborating with the colonizers in that time, which was the Romans. And yeah, it led to the destruction of the Second Temple. I wouldn't say that the Pharisees are bad people. And, not only just the Pharisees, you don't judge people because only God can judge you. You don't judge people, and you don't see the Bible as the hate text, as the text that you read to hate other people, even though they don't exist anymore, like the Sadducees. But the Pharisees, they still exist. The Pharisees are, the rabbinic Judaism is the continuation of the Pharisaic movement. So you don't judge people. So we need to, make clear that reading the Bible is not judging people.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jenry. I think that was a clear explanation. Okay, I think we have that is the last question for this session. If maybe any closing statement, Dr. Jenry?
Well, closing statement was actually done by the conclusion, at the conclusion part. But my really last statement is that, read the Bible with the original language. Without reading it from the original language, you have this presumption because you are not reading it from the original language. That's why there is this misinterpretation of the ideas. You can't see the connection with for example, like in the Kohelet, you can't see the connection between Kohelet and Aramaic language and the Persian tradition and etc. and so on. So read the Bible read the Bible in the original languages so that you can understand the Bible more and do not have misinterpretation because you only read it from the translation.
Okay, thank you. We are grateful that this session has concluded. Thank you, Dr. Jenry, for the excellent and blessing presentation. And thank you for the participant for participate to discussion. May God blesses you, Dr. Jenry, in your work, ministry, and researchers. I hope what has been presented today also can be a blessing to all. As an appreciation, we're going to show you the digital certificate as a symbol. Okay, thank you again, Dr. Jenry. Okay, let's go to the next session. We'll moderate to Dr. Harold.